Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Timeless Steel Garage. I'm Jimmy and we're still working on this 64 Riviera. So we got it running pretty good, but our timing isn't consistent and our water pump failed on us. So I went ahead and skipped ahead to this point and tore everything apart so we can start fresh from the timing chain. Now this is the original timing chain, and you can tell because it's got nylon coating on the gears. You see that yellow right there? Now this is what's known as timing chain slap. Look at that. Garbage. So changing the old water pump turned into, while we're in here, let's fix everything on the front of this motor. So if you got to do a timing chain in the car, just spare yourself the agony and just commit to pulling the radiator, get the whole front end out. It doesn't take that much longer, and honestly, the further we started taking stuff apart, now's the time to update the cooling system, make sure your radiator hoses are good, change the water pump, change your gaskets, change your seals. We had a front main leak, you know, so it's kind of, while we're in here, we're going to do all of it. We need to change the alternator. This power steering system's missing a bracket I got to put on, so this is a whole lot of while we're in here stuff. So move over here to this table and you can see we got a new roller timing chain. I got that from Centerville Auto. We got a new external balancer. We got a new timing chain cover because the old one was roached. I mean, check this out. The water pump failed so bad that the shaft on the pump was, the bearing was completely coming apart, and the shaft was actually coming out. A new one, again from Centerville Auto. It's got a modern seal on it, so we won't have any problems with that. But you can see on the back of this water pump, the shaft was actually coming out of the impeller, and you could pull the front of this water pump about 1/4 inch. So, big problem. And then you look at the balancer, and you could see on the outside of the balancer that this was basically spinning and is useless. So I couldn't put a timing light on this motor, had to do it by ear. Figured out the fan clutch was not clutching anymore. So right then and there I got to replace all those. Missing the fan shroud, which on these old long nose cars, if you got a mechanical fan and no fan shroud, it's useless. We got a new alternator, new water pump, new belts, new thermostat. Couple of headlights are out, and then for all you guys that were giving me garbage about points, I just went ahead and picked up one of these MSD drop-in ready distributors. I just got points back in the car just to get it back running. I don't want to run points. So once we're done with this whole table here, we'll have a completely brand new cooling system, brand new timing system, and really this thing's done after that. Mechanically, we'll have gone through every major system. So let's go ahead and get to work. First thing I'm going to do is get this timing chain off. Now when you go to do this job, get it to top dead center before you start. Pull it on this motor, on a Buick Nailhead, this is the #1 cylinder. Pull that plug, stick your finger in the hole, rotate it till it pops your finger off and there's no more compression coming out. Pop your distributor cap off, make sure it's pacing at that #1 cylinder and you're top dead center. And so now I'm going to go ahead and pull everything apart and we can start fresh. Alright, so you can see now that our cam and our crank, everything's accessible, and look at that. See that piece of plastic? That's what you're risking when you drive on a nylon timing chain. Don't take much for that to go down in the oil pan and get sucked up. That happened just from me taking it apart. Look at plastic started coming off just from sliding it off. So it was time. Caught this one. I'm actually impressed that this has been on here for so long. But you can see little nylon bits coming off of it just from me taking it off. It's shot. So you can see this new unit here. It's got a heavy duty chain. It's adjustable for performance cams. It's a nice piece, and we're going to put that one back in. Alright, so I went ahead and threw this timing chain on off camera so that this video is not 3 hours long. Now you can see there's 3 dots here. Now I went this dot here, the inner dot lines up with the crank key. The outer dot lines up with the dot on the cam key. Now these new chains are real tight, so you may have to tweak the cam a tiny bit and tweak the crank a little bit to get these dots perfectly lined up. If they're a little bit off, it's off. They need to be perfectly lined up. They don't need to be, if they're cocked off like 1/8 of an inch, it's off. It needs to be straight up and down. And the way that I do it is you start by getting this bottom gear on the crank, and then you take the top cam gear and you kind of just drape the chain down, let it hang until you get the cam kind of lined up. Once you're certain that the cam and the crank are lined up, then the hard part becomes putting this cam gear on here. So what you do is you just put the chain around the bottom of the crank gear and hold it up as tight as you can. And I used a little bit of a rubber mallet, just lightly tapped on the front of this until it started. And then once you get this gear started, you just lightly tap on each gear until the chain seats together. And that's it. And you can see, look at how tight this is. When I pull on this, there's literally no deflection at all. See that? I mean, that is tight like a tiger. You know what I'm saying? So she ain't going anywhere. The other thing I did is I went ahead and cleaned up this gasket surface. I'm not done. You got to be careful down here in the oil pan that you don't drop stuff in your oil pan. So stuff a rag in there. I just pulled the rag out. But really the hard part of this job is done. The hardest part of this whole job is getting this timing cover off. And honestly, the thing that I've found that works best for these timing covers, go on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description below. Get yourself one of these cheap induction heaters. This one's called a hot rod. Yeah, you know, a real hot rod. And get yourself some extra coils. And you put these little coils around the outside of the bolts, and it gets those bolts red hot. I didn't snap a single water pump or timing cover bolt coming out, and you can just look at the corrosion on these things. On these nail heads, they're known to break. And you don't want to go ham on them. You know, once you back the bolt out just a tiny hair, once you get it to break, tighten it up a little bit, just like a tap and die. Work it tight, work it loose, work it tight, work it loose, and do that on each one of the bolts until you're able to get them all out. And if you're lucky, these two bolts right here are your problem children. You won't break them. Your other problem children are the water crossover pipe bolts, or correction, right here, these crossover pipe bolts. But just take your time. Like I said, I'll throw a description in the link, and if you don't have one of these, they're cheap. This thing's worked for 3 cars so far, and if it burns up now, I've got my money's worth out of it. But the beauty of these induction heaters is it's not a torch, it's not a flame. You're not worried about hurting things around what you're trying to get loose. You don't got to weld a nut on with a welder. Anybody can use those things. I can credit my buddy Sean, my cousin's husband, for that. So thanks, Sean. But yeah, hardest part of this whole job is done. Now we just got to put it all back together. All right, so next thing that goes on here is our little splash guard for the chain. Okay, and then we've got a little concave pulley for the fuel pump. It's actually what the fuel pump, when the cam turns, this is an oblong shape. When the cam turns, it actually pumps this arm on the fuel pump. So as the cam comes around, it pushes against that arm, and that creates our mechanical fuel pump pressure. It's a keyed pulley. There's 2 holes on this aftermarket cam gear, but it only goes into one. You just got to make sure that that index hole is lined up before you put the bolt in. Okay, now that we got the fuel pump cam lobe on, this guy right here, we're gonna put engine lube all over this chain so that the first time this motor tries to fire up, she's not dry. But anyways, you get the idea. All right, that's it. So our new timing chain is installed, our fuel pump cam's installed, our splash guard, and we've oiled it. So now it's next step is going to be timing cover. All right, so I got this new timing cover from Centerville Auto. It's got a TA part number on it, TA Performance. But the old timing cover was just destroyed inside here, so I'm going to go ahead and put some gasket tack on the back of this, put a new gasket on it, and I'll get ready to put it on the car. Righty then. This is just Permatex high-tack gasket sealant. The stuff's a mess, but it makes putting things on with these paper gaskets a lot easier. And you tack the side against the water pump, or against the timing chain cover to keep the gasket in place. And then we're going to put some ultra gray on the side that actually goes to the block. Since this is a brand new machine surface, I'm not worried about RTV on this side. But the block definitely is going to have some imperfections. So everybody's got their own opinions on the right way to do this. So I'm not going to tell you the right way, but this is the way that I'm doing it. Some guys use RTV on both sides. Some guys don't use a gasket at all. I like the little paper gasket. It takes up some of the slop in that old 60s block. And yeah, line up the holes. And you let this dry for like 5 minutes, and then when you go to put this on, you don't got to worry about aligning the bolt holes and the bolt not going through because it hits the gasket and all that good stuff. We got some ultra gray, I think, over here. I like using the gray on timing covers, water pumps, stuff like that. This is right stuff. Check a 1, 2. All right. And I'm just kind of, and my goal today is really just get this timing cover on and get the new water pump on and let that stuff tack overnight before we put any coolant in it, and then come back and assemble the rest of the front end. Alright, well, we got that gasket evenly on the paper. There we go. Next thing, we got this little piece here which goes on the bottom of the oil pan, because we obviously had to, the original gasket's one piece, but that original gasket was toast when we took the old timing chain cover off. So this is kind of going to sit on the front, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But for now, we're going to go ahead and tack this gasket up. We are going to probably let this sit on there for a little bit so it doesn't get disrupted when I go to put the timing cover on. It feels like this is made out of felt. But I really don't want a whole bunch of this getting squeezed out into the oil pan. But there's no way this is going to seal without a little help. Alright, well, down here you can see that felt oil pan gasket I added, and it's perfectly cut so it won't push back. What you see, I put a little RTV up and down on the block surface to the gasket on both sides, so that when we push this timing cover in, it seals. But yeah, we're ready to put the timing cover on, so that's the next step. So here we go. There's one thing I forgot to do, and that is take this big bracket off with the alternator. That's a fail. That is a big fail. Let's return after I take that bracket off. Alright, let's try that again. Oh. All right, well, this new cover fits pretty tight, so the hardest part is getting it all lined up. You got to put this bolt hole right here on these new timing covers is the indexing hole. So that one's got to go in first, then I got that one in, and then the hardest part is getting the alignment knurled down here to line up. So I use this bolt to kind of pull it in, then get the 2 oil pan bolts in, followed up by the rest of the bolts. Now we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to gasket tack the back of the water pump, and then I'm going to put some RTV on here and get the water pump on. Alright, so I just set the water pump on, and now I'm going to go ahead. It's 2 big bolts here, a couple big bolts down here, and the rest are these little bolts. Now I went ahead and got all new stainless hardware. Anti-seize is your friend on these nail heads. Alright, well, not my cleanest work. If you find a way to not get anti-seize all over yourself, let me know, because I'm terrible with it. But brand new roller timing chain, brand new timing chain cover, brand new water pump. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the new balancer on. And then after that, really, all the hard stuff is done. The reassembly process, I'm going to change the alternator while I've got it there. Radiator will drop back in. Everything else is easy. Really, the hardest part left to do is put the little crossover pipe in here. It's got an O-ring that seals it inside there. I'm going to go ahead and throw the balancer on next. Now, I got all my parts from Matt at Centerville. He's a good dude. I go ahead and make a little mark on these so I can see if it slips in the future. And then there's 2 timing marks on these aftermarket ones. There's a thick one and a skinny one. For these nail heads, you want the skinny one. So I stole some yellow nail polish from my wife. I said, give me the nail polish you're never ever going to use. And this is what she gave me. So anyhow, now she goes on. Already sliced myself up pretty good today. There's that. There we go. Boom. And imagine that. It's actually on top dead center and indicates top dead center for a change, which this motor never has done. So 0, 0. Look at that. Would you look at that? Now the thing with this is it has to be torqued to 220 foot-pounds, and you see how easy that thing went on. So if you don't torque that right, you can kiss your cranks now goodbye. Alright, that's going to do it for this episode. Nothing too exciting here, but this motor is going to run so much better. I'm telling you, if you ever had a motor with a sloppy timing chain, it's like adding 50 horsepower. I mean, a slack chain like that will retard your timing like 10 degrees. So really, next time we come back, we'll go ahead and get that crossover pipe in. We'll change the alternator. We'll get the power steering and alternator brackets back in. We'll drop the radiator in and install this new fan shroud. Put all new belts on, new pulleys, and this thing will be back on the road cruising like a 6.4. We'll see you next time. Like, subscribe.